we must have been there for like an hour just sitting there talking. Eventually, he's like, he tells me that he has a knife on him and he's going to kill me.
Welcome to How I Embraced the Suck, a podcast where you get to hear from veterans what life in the military is really like. I am your host, Walt, and before we start, you should know that I do not censor the show in any way. You have been warned. Yeah, well, let's just jump right into it. Today we got Sam with us, a former Marine. Yeah. Well, okay. So I'll ask this now. What annoys you more? Jokes about urban warfare or jokes about being related to Carl and Keith?
Honestly, I get Keith way more than Carl. It would probably annoy me less if someone brought up Carl Urban because I think Carl Urban's great. I like him a little bit more than Keith Urban. But you know, the thing, like, people ask me if I'm related to them, and I'm like, no, they're Australian. Like, I don't know those guys. Like, I don't know what their background is. Like my last name comes from Hungary, so like maybe we're like fourth cousins,
right?
Like, from the 1800s,
right.
But like, no, I don't know those guys.
They came from a penal colony. We don't talk about them.
Exactly. Yeah, that's penal colony. It's probably why they went so crazy with the lockdowns. Kind of insane.
Oh, dude. Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah. I think anybody, no matter where you land on like the on the spectrum of how lockdowns do, I'm pretty sure most people are like, yeah, Australia went a little bit too hard.
Right.
Yeah. Like, maybe you shouldn't have like concentration camp-ish places for people. Right.
Oh no, you'll be comfortable. You'll have a good time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you have my best interest at heart.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, I guess at least it was hotels, but still.
Right. Oh. Yeah, so what got you, why did you join the Marines? What's kind of your background, your motivation, your backstory?
Yeah, so I'm a third generation American on my dad's side. So my grandfather was born in a Hungarian community in the US, so first language Hungarian and everything. And he he was in the Army in World War II. And then my dad was in the Air Force during Vietnam, and cousins on my dad's side of the family, military, airborne and Air Force and everything. So, and my uncles, it's like big military family on my dad's side. I was kind of always going to join, but I decided on the Marine Corps, probably because I talked to the Marine Corps recruiter first, and he convinced me, and I ended up joining like right after high school. Like, I was graduated high school for not even 3 weeks when I was going to Parris Island.
Oh wow! So you signed ahead of time, and he's just
So
he's okay.
I enlisted prior to my senior year starting. So I had been talking to the recruiter junior year. You're allowed to talk to the recruiter in your junior year, and then once you're done with your junior year, you can actually talk to them in a different way. And you're allowed to talk in junior year, but you can't like sign any papers,
right.
And there's like limitations. But once you're done with your junior year and you're going to be graduating less than 12 months ahead, then they let you sign the papers. And then as long as you graduate high school, because you have to graduate high school now to join the military, you can go right after that. So yeah, I ended up leaving, and I graduated in late May, and I was in boot camp in Parris Island in early June.
Was that a culture shock, or were you prepared for it?
Nobody's prepared for that. Nobody is, unless you grew up in like Dagestan and you're like wrestling bears with Khabib. Like, no, you're not ready for it. No, being a suburban kid and then going to the Marine Corps, like, nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
Yeah. So you went in. You didn't go in with an open contract. You went in with I can't remember the MOS number, but it was broader than you anticipated, right?
Yeah. So I joined I joined the Marine Corps on an engineering contract. And when you join the Marine Corps, you join, if you're active duty, generally you join based on a field. So the field is engineering, and that's 13XX and 11XX. So it's like, it's combat engineers. It's also like bulk fuelers, people that fuel up trucks. It's generator mechanics, electricians, refrigeration mechanics, which is what I ended up being, which is part of utilities, and a few other things. So like I joined and I thought that I was getting a combat engineer contract, but really I was signing an engineering contract. So I actually went in with this other guy who had the exact same contract as me, but we didn't know we had the same contract. He was going in, he wanted to be a heavy equipment operator, which is part of engineering. And I wanted to be a combat engineer, but he ended up being, we were at the job school at the same time. He left for boot camp a week after me. He ended up being a combat engineer, and I ended up being a refrigeration mechanic. So neither of us got what we wanted. He got what I wanted.
Right.
But like, yeah, it worked out. It was a cool job once I got over the shock that I had joined the Marine Corps and I was going to be working on refrigeration equipment. But it was all right. It was an okay job. I worked in a maintenance shop the whole time. I ended up doing a lot of other stuff in the Marine Corps. I ended up in like billets. So like I was put in like different jobs, because the thing about refrigeration equipment is that it doesn't really break, because it doesn't have a lot of moving parts.
Sure.
So like it's not like the heavy equipment, the trucks, they get used, they have like oils that you have to replace, but most of refrigeration stuff is like, it's solid state systems. It's unlikely to break unless it's physically broken.
Sure.
Or like, some parts do move, so it will break eventually, but like mostly it's fine. And most of the breaking will just be electrical components that are very easy to fix.
Right. So you one or two guys could handle a large unit's needs, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Sure. Right. So one or two guys could handle a large unit's needs. But the thing is that based on the type of unit I was in a unit that was on a MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit. So you, as the MU, you deploy on 3 separate ships as part of a fleet, right? So because like we had enough equipment really for one guy, maybe 2, really 1 would be sufficient as long as they're like a proficient mechanic, a technician. But because we had to be split up on 3 different ships, and because it's like so spread out, there were 3 of us, which meant that 2 of us are put in different jobs.
Sure.
Essentially, we're made to do other things inside the platoon, maintenance platoon. So yeah. I did a few different things. I ended up in charge of the tool room. Like I would just sign out tools to people. I didn't like that. Yeah, that was like the first thing I did. They noticed that I wasn't like a complete idiot, so they're like, you're gonna do the paperwork.
Right.
Like, okay, guess I'm doing the paperwork.
And on your resume, you can say that you were responsible for $3 million of equipment.
Of course, yeah. Everyone loves to talk about that, and no, it's complete bullshit.
Right.
But no, I was in charge. I was 19 years old, and like I was legitimately in charge of about tens of millions of dollars of equipment. Because
that's crazy.
It's like specialized tools, and like the tool room had like some like vehicles that were like essentially our responsibility, and trailers and all these specialized tools. It was a lot.
Sure.
It was a lot.
Sure.
Yeah. And then after that, I ended up being like, when I was deployed, after I deployed, we're on deployment, I ended up being like in charge. I did a lot of administrative stuff, honestly. Like it was we were in charge of all the trucks and tanks and all the stuff. No, we didn't have tanks on my ship, but trucks, LAVs, light armored vehicles, like APCs, we call them LAVs. And like a bunch of different types of trucks and like big storage containers. And our platoon was in charge of like making sure that they were treated with like anti-rust stuff. So I was in charge of that on deployment, working with my sergeant. And then when I got back, I became in charge of layettes, which I actually enjoyed a lot more. That's like, we would take the parts from supply that our mechanics need to fix our vehicles and everything. And I would go to we'd go to supply, grab the stuff, bring it back. We had this big room organized with bins where we would then sign them out to people.
Sure.
and that was okay. And then after that, eventually, like at the time I wanted to be a environmental scientist. That was my goal at the time. So after the Marine Corps, so I ended up there was an opportunity to go to like a short job school and become a hazardous materials site manager. So I went and did that, and that became my secondary MOS, and I became the hazmat guy for my section,
Sure.
which was engineers, and then for the platoon, and then eventually, like, I really enjoyed it, and I finished out my contract as the environmental compliance officer for the battalion, which at my rank, like I was a corporal.
Mm-hmm.
The environmental compliance officer is generally at least like a staff sergeant or maybe a second lieutenant.
Sure.
So I was I was in a billet high above my rank, and I had a lot of autonomy, and I had a great time doing that job. I enjoyed it a lot.
So was that because of just the schooling you'd taken, or was it because of lack of higher ranks to fill the position, the billet?
Well, it was so I was working under a gunnery sergeant. It's like an E7.
Sure.
And like that's a job that nobody really wants to do, but like I was like volunteering to do it.
Sure.
So like basically what happened is like I became the platoon hazmat guy,
right?
And I was doing that, and then the gunny was the ECO. He was the environmental compliance officer, and he was like, I don't want to do this, and I started doing some of his jobs.
Right. Okay.
I started doing some of his stuff because I was the platoon's guy. I was the platoon's hazmat guy, but the battalion's hazmat guy, which is like above the platoon. Most units have companies. We didn't have companies. So my platoon went straight to the battalion.
Okay.
And the battalion, like my gunnery sergeant was in charge of the whole battalion. So like it technically wasn't like my job as the platoon hazmat guy, but because the guy who was in charge of the whole battalion was in my platoon, he just kind of started pawning off work on me. And then eventually it was just like, oh, well, you're doing this, so like I'm going to make you the assistant environmental compliance officer. And then eventually I was just doing all of it, which was fine. Like I was happy to do it. And it also meant that like I'm a corporal directly, like my full-time job is directly like dealing with the gunnery sergeant. Like I work directly for the gunnery sergeant. So I'm like, I just text him, tell him what I'm doing, and I do whatever I want as long as I get the work done.
Right.
So there's a lot of autonomy that you generally don't find at that low of a rank. And I also wasn't really in charge of any Marines at that point, which was good. That's a hassle and a half. Yeah. Seriously. Yeah.
Oh.
Marines tend to do dumb stuff and get in trouble, and then it's your fault.
Right.
Yeah.
The classic problem, the classic quandary.
Yeah. The classic problem of Marines, killing hookers in Okinawa.
Right.
And you having to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah. Got some crazy stories about stuff that happened. Usually not with any of my guys, but like just in general.
Sure. Yeah. That you hear of. Yeah. Stuff like
or
that.
Or like even people that I know, like people around me. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think most of this stuff is like public, but like, yeah, my sergeant, when I first came to the Marine Corps, to the fleet, my sergeant at the unit that he was at before, he had been on duty. Like he was in charge of the barracks at the moment that they discovered a meth lab in the barracks at his unit. I swear to God. Yeah. They were cooking meth inside the barracks.
Yeah. That I'm intrigued how that got past room inspections.
I was wondering the same thing. I asked him, and like, I don't know. I have no idea. Like, cause the smell, right? Like I've never been in a meth lab, but I've heard it smells. So like, I don't know. I don't know how they got away with it, but like it's from his mouth, and I looked it up, and it was real. That happened. And it was
wow.
And that was at the unit that I eventually, like, when I was getting ready to get out, they sent me to another unit for about 3 months. And that's the one that had the meth lab like a few years before. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There's some other ones as well. Yeah. One time I chased a guy. We came back from deployment, and there was I'm sorry. Do you want, I can tell these stories later.
Yeah.
If you guys
roll on.
This
is great.
I we just got back from deployment. I was a Lance Corporal. So I was like, I had been in for a long time. I was still a Lance Corporal. I was like, you ever heard of a senior Lance?
Yeah.
You ever heard that concept? Yeah.
I've
So
heard
I
of.
was like, right. So it's like a Lance Corporal is not an NCO rank, but it's like right below NCO. It's right below Corporal.
Right.
But I was like the most senior Lance in my platoon. But so when I'm on duty, I'm like a rover. So I'm walking around, and I had deployed with the sergeant on duty, and I had deployed with this other guy who was only in the barracks because he gets back from deployment and his wife had left him and taken his kid. And he's like, and there's always stuff like this.
Right. Yeah.
And he's just drunk, like in the courtyard with like a bottle of Fireball, talking about killing himself and stuff. So like I'm roving around, and like my job is to rove around the barracks and make sure everything's good, and that's what I was doing. But when I noticed this guy, and I start talking to the sergeant about it, and he tells me like, "Hey, that's your assignment tonight." I'm like, okay, like my assignment is for the next few hours is to hang out with this dude. And he decides like we're on French Creek, which is on like the edge of which is on the edge of Camp Lejeune. It's like It's right on the water. It's pretty. I mean, French Creek itself is like pretty crappy. The buildings are bad, and there's like a water treatment plant there. It smells bad sometimes, but like it's right on the water. It's pretty nice. We'd go fishing back there. But this guy, this dude that I'm with, he decides he's going to go into the woods. He wants to get me off of his back. So he's like, I'm gonna go into these woods. I'm like, all right, man, I'm coming with you. Like, because I'm texting the sergeant at this point. Right. I'm texting him and being like, dude, he's going in the woods. He's like, all right, follow him. I'm like, okay, like we're going in the woods. And he's like, we're like walking around the barracks. He's going towards the woods. He's like rolling down the sleeves on his flannel, and he's like, I know these woods. He's like this. It's like this redneckish dude from somewhere in the South. And he's telling me, I know these woods. I'm gonna lose you in these woods. And I was like, no, you're not. I know them too. Like I had been back there too, but It's getting late. Like it's like 7:00. The sun's going down, and we're going into the woods. So we go into the woods and we start walking for a while, and I'm just following him. And eventually he starts running away from me and trying to get away. And I chased him like through the woods in the dark. Like it's swampy, brambles everywhere. And eventually I grabbed him and like took him down to the ground, and like he convinced me he wasn't going to run again. So we're just sitting down next to each other talking, and I'm texting the sergeant, like telling him like, dude, well, not dude, but like, I'm like, come on. Like it becomes more like at this point, like I know this guy, I know he's a sergeant, but like this situation got to the point where I'm calling the sergeant by his first name, which is very rare, but like it gets to that point eventually. But I'm like texting him, I'm like, dude, he's like, we're in the woods. And eventually like the sergeant is like, I'm going to come find you guys. And I'm like, okay, like we went into the woods this way. I'm trying to like tell him, but we're like a half a mile into the woods. We must have been there for like an hour just sitting there talking. Eventually he's like, he tells me that he has a knife on him and he's going to kill me. And this is something that I didn't tell either the sergeant or anyone else, but like my guys, because I knew that if I told anybody about that he would get in a lot more trouble. But he tells me that, so I start watching him more closely, and he takes so I find an opportunity to grab him and like throw him on the ground. I had him pinned on the ground with his arms behind his back, like, and I was telling him to like give me all of his shit. Like I took his like knife and his lighter and everything. I literally frisked this guy in the middle of the woods in the dark. All this time I'm telling the dude that I'm with that like I'm texting my girlfriend, but I'm actually texting the sergeant.
Right.
Because he's suspicious. He's like, who are you texting? I'm like, I'm just texting my girlfriend. I gotta text my girlfriend. But yeah, I took him down to the ground. He was smaller than me and drunk. So it was okay, but like we're in the woods and he's like telling me he's gonna kill me with a knife. Like I'm on edge. Got him down to the ground and frisked him, took everything. And he like after that we start talking again. I've got his knife, I've got his lighter. He kept bitching about the whiskey, so I gave him back his whiskey, but like it was a little bottle. It was
Right.
it was one of the. It wasn't like a fifth or anything. Even it was
Right.
like smaller than that. And we're there, and eventually I see the light. I see the light from the sergeant's flashlight, and he sees it too, and he gets up and tries to run, and I grab him. And I'm grabbing him, and he's trying to get away. Yeah, he's a squirrely motherfucker. So he's like ducking me, and I'm not trying to hurt him or anything, but I'm like grabbing him. And I see the sergeant like coming in the woods, and I'm like, Shane, we're over here. Like, we're here.
Right.
And so he eventually comes, comes right up on us, and he's right there. And like at that point, I'm like, okay, I can relax. And I kind of relax. I was grabbing him, but I relaxed off of him. And I swear to God, somehow he fucking gets away. Like, it's me and the sergeant, and he runs away. And like the sergeant like starts running after him, and like I'm running after them too. But they both I'm running after them like in the right direction. But after a few minutes, I'm like looking around. I can't even see the light. I have no idea where they are. And like I got stuck it's swampy back there. I got like my boots stuck eventually, and like in a swampy spot. My boots are covered in mud. I can't move. And I couldn't find them. And eventually I just stop, and like I'm trying to listen and look around for the light, because I like can't see them anymore. And I know basically what direction I have to go in. And I know that like it's a thin strip of woods with the water. So like I'm not going to get really lost out there. I can find my way eventually. So eventually I find them again, and the sergeant was like, I mean, he was being more aggressive than I was. Like, I was trying not to hurt this guy, but the sergeant was just, he was kind of beating the crap out of him. Yeah. And like, so we're both grabbing, like, eventually I catch up to them. We start walking back, but it's a long walk. It's like 25 minutes. They're talking the whole time. Again, the sergeant tries to take his whiskey. He won't shut the fuck up about it. So the sergeant gives him his whiskey back. And, we're walking out. He tries to get away a few times. Every time he tries to get away, the sergeant just punches the shit out of him. And we're dragging him. And I keep telling him, I'm like, dude, stop trying to fight me. He's gonna hit you. Just listen to me. Like, because he's just getting his ass beat every time. And we eventually almost get back to the barracks. And like, the sergeant is letting me grab him. So I'm grabbing him and walking with him. And I'm telling him, like, dude, if you try to do anything, he's going to hurt you. I'm trying to help you. And eventually he sees the barracks, and he leans back. He tries to chug the rest of his whiskey. And I'm like, dude, stop. And the sergeant sees it, slaps it out of his hands, and just like grabs him and like grabs him by his shirt.
Yeah.
Like in two spots, and just flips him over onto the freaking concrete or the asphalt. And I'm like, oh my God. And he really like hurt him. And so after that, we basically dragged him back into the barracks, put him in his room, told his roommate to take care of him. I went upstairs and got 2 Gatorades out of my fridge and came down and like into the office, and I handed him a Gatorade, and both of us just like exhaled. And I was like, that shit was crazy. That was crazy. And then I got off the shift, and I went and told my friends what had happened, but I never told anyone else that he had threatened to kill me.
Right.
Because I didn't want him to get in trouble. But yeah. Long-winded story of that. That's probably the craziest thing that happened to me. But I have some other stories that were like, other people that I knew that are even worse, I think.
Right. Yeah, you get a bunch of young guys and give them access to alcohol and a lot of pressure, and who knows what it's going to happen.
Seriously, I feel bad for the guy, because he was like, that's a terrible situation to be in. Your wife leaves you, takes your kid.
Yeah.
And he had like, he had done some stuff in the past that a lot of other people, like he had stolen from another Marine and gotten in trouble for it. So he didn't have like a good reputation around the battalion.
Sure.
But like, I'm not going to treat I wasn't going to treat anybody differently based on that. Like I obviously I didn't like that he had done that, but like, this guy is like, he was I was from the suburbs of New England. Like he was this poor dude from Appalachia. So like it's not it's his upbringing. Like I'm not going to judge him for what he does. Like it's a different thing,
different culture, so to speak.
Right. Absolutely. I think he grew up very poor, and then like he stole from a Marine, which I really really don't like. But I also understand that like I don't know. I think that his upbringing was more of like a scarcity mentality that I didn't necessarily have.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is I was more privileged than this guy, and I'm not going to judge him.
Sure. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it totally makes sense. Especially given, the circumstances and that that can be tough.
Yeah.
I've noticed that often the military, the environment or maybe the culture in the military encourages early marriage, but it discourages what it takes to maintain the marriage.
Of course.
That makes sense.
No, that's absolutely. It heavily incentivizes you to get married because living in the barracks is rough, and they're in your life all the time.
Right.
So it does incentivize you to get married.
It's hard to cook meth if you're living in the barracks.
It's hard to cook meth. Those guys should have got a house out in town. They would have been fine. They could have made a bunch of money, man. Yeah, come on. Plus the motorcycle gangs there. I mean, they could have it would have been easy,
right?
to get connections.
Yeah.
Not that I've considered selling meth. I just don't think if I were to consider selling meth, it wouldn't be in the barracks.
Yeah.
Like I wouldn't be cooking it in the barracks.
Right.
It's amazing what guys could do in the barracks, though.
Yeah.
One time I found a cat. Guys were keeping a cat in their barracks room.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like it was insane. Like it's I don't know how you hide that, but they didn't hide it forever.
Yeah.
Hearing like we were doing like I was randomly at the barracks. This was when I was the environmental compliance officer. I was randomly at the barracks, which was also the office for our battalion. So our offices are in the ground floor of the barracks. And they were going to do a room inspection, and we go into this room. I just happened to go in there with like another NCO from my platoon and the barracks manager, who was a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And the barracks manager, she opens up the door. We walk in, and we're standing in the room. I don't even remember why we were in there, but I swear to God, we hear a meow from the bathroom, and all of us just look at each other like, "What was that?" And like no one says anything, and then there's another meow, and we're like, "Oh my God." And we open the bathroom, and there is a black kitten, just cute as hell, just comes out of the bathroom and snuggles up to us. We're like, oh my God, what the fuck are you guys doing? Yeah, not as crazy as meth, but it's pretty crazy.
Right. I wish we could let you keep this because it's so cute, but
seriously, yeah, you just can't. I don't know. Maybe we could have had an outside cat like around the barracks, but no, you can't do it like that,
Right.
Huh.
So yeah, so you study anthropology.
I do.
And talk a lot about that. What's you were saying you want to talk about military culture. What aspects? How do you want to jump into that?
Yeah, so
I'll give you the hard shift instead of taking it on myself.
All right. Yeah, I can do that. So I love anthropology, and anthropology is the study of humans. So I got out of the Marine Corps. I went to school to be a history teacher, but being a history teacher at like a high school is more like being a babysitter. And I just wanted to engage with the material a little bit more. So I got degrees in history, education, and anthropology. I just took a lot of extra classes, and I did class in the summer and the winter. And a lot of anthropology that I did was cultural anthropology, which is like studying both indigenous cultures and other cultures. Like I took a class on indigenous Australia, which was really good. I took multiple classes on both contemporary Native Americans as well as historical Native Americans. I did an archaeological field school where I studied I did archaeology, which is like, it's part of anthropology. You're doing the actual digging up of artifacts, material culture. And I did that on battlefield archaeology for some battles of the 17th century in New England, as well as some domestic sites from some older, the time in the woodland Native Americans, which is like East Coast, Northeast, Paleo Native American sites, which are like 2,000 years ago.
Oh, okay.
yeah, so I've done a lot of different ones. I've also volunteered with an organization that I won't name just because they
Sure.
probably, it's a bunch of waspy white people,
Right.
and I don't think that they want to know that me as a member is talking about it, and then I'm saying crazy shit on podcasts. So, but yeah, I've done a lot of volunteering with archaeology to do other sites. I've done like 19th century sites as well. Yeah. But so anthropology, study of humans broadly, cultural anthropology, study of human cultures, and that's largely what I do. And so I've looked at, I haven't done any episodes yet on military culture, but looking at military culture from an anthropological perspective is interesting because the military, especially today, has such a specific culture that is even more detached from everyday American life than it would have been 150 years ago.
Okay. Now,
Just no.
is
Go ahead.
that you say that is that what am I trying to say? I'm not trying to challenge back, but it's easy to think that our current times are different from the past. Does that make sense? Wow, I am really putting my foot in my mouth here. What?
No, that's good.
What? I guess I should say, how do you know that it's so different now than, say, like, what am I thinking? Like the Western soldier in 1880 or something, out on the Calvary Patrol.
Actually, what I mean is that the military culture today is pretty similar. It's changed, but the military culture right now is much more similar to the military culture of the 1880s. So military culture in 2023 is much more similar to military culture in 1880 than American life in general in 2023 is similar to American life in 1880.
Okay.
It's like, you learn about tenement houses in like the 19th century. And, there's a bunch of single women who work in a factory, like especially in New England, where we had these factories in the 19th century, where there's a lot of single women that live and they have a house mother, they have rules and everything. They live in essentially squad bays with people, and there are rules for what they can and can't do. And that would have been the same for single men in the military, as well as working in other places. They would have rules, and they wouldn't really be able to leave unless they were married. And that's how the military still works. But that's how regular American life in a lot of places would have worked in the 19th century, especially in industrialized places.
Okay. Sure. I see. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I over convoluted it.
No, it's okay.
But yeah, so like the differences between culture nowadays and the military.
So it's, living, like going to boot camp in the Marine Corps, you live in a squad bay for 4 months with 100 other guys, maybe less, depending on 90 guys. It could be as low as 60, depending on like what time of the year you go. It's biggest in the summer. So actually now with their recruitment numbers, it's probably lower now as well, because they're having a real hard time recruiting people.
Yeah.
So, but in the 1880s, like in the far past, the shift in life from like regular American life to going to the military it wouldn't have been that different. But today it's a huge culture shock, because it's like a completely different thing. Like I don't know when you were born, but I was born in 1995. Like I am square in the participation medal generation.
Right.
Like, I grew up on participation ribbons and shit like that. Like second grade, we're playing soccer. Doesn't matter as long as you do your best. And then you join the Marine Corps, and it's like, it matters if you do your best, because you're going to die and your friends are going to fucking die.
Right.
And the stakes are higher. I had this conversation with Tommy Salmons of the Year Zero podcast. I don't know if you're aware of him.
Yeah.
But I was talking about how I didn't talk about it in regards to military culture, but I did talk about it in regards to how I did talk about it in regards to like the participation ribbon generation. And I know that that's such a cliche to talk about. Like 15 years ago, you would have heard of Glenn Beck or somebody complaining about participation trophies. But I think that it's a better point than people really realize. That it's a really good metaphor for all the things that were different about how my generation was raised. I'm a younger millennial.
Sure.
And in American culture in general, for the past 50 years, like, you can pretty much scrape by, like, not putting in that much effort, and like things will, you might not be thriving, but you're going to survive. Whereas if you go back to the 19th century, especially the 18th century, if you're not like, if you're a subsistence farmer, which most Americans would have been in the early 19th century, or especially the 18th century, not only are you a subsistence farmer where if you don't do a good job, your family might starve. That's a real possibility. There's also the possibility of like Native American tax at certain points. Like, that was a very real threat at certain times in America. And a culture that is like, look, you have to do this. If you don't do this, you might die. The stakes are huge. Okay.
Right.
And in American culture today, the stakes are very low. The stakes are very, very low. You can just float by.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have, politically, I have something to say about how I think that there's way too much corporate welfare, and there should be like, and that welfare for poorer Americans should be better than it is, and maybe not as convoluted. But at the same time, like, you're probably not going to starve to death. You might not get the healthiest food, but like in America, there is food insecurity, but people aren't really like, the problem is more that people are obese rather than people are starving to death. Whereas 150 years ago, that's a real threat.
Sure.
And in the military, you still have to have that mentality. Like, they have to beat that mentality into you rather than it being just the mentality that you grew up with.
Right.
Because stakes are that high, especially if you're in like the Marine Corps. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's there may be subcultures in America, like you were saying, like the guy from Appalachia or whatever, where that's still you're closer to the need to perform.
Absolutely.
Just to survive. Yeah.
But
that's true. I mean, it's crazy the amount of ability in America right now to literally produce nothing and live your entire life. It's wild.
It's because we have so much excess, right? And like industrial farming created all excess calories and everything.
Right.
And really the problems of like starving, they result from issues in distribution, not issues in actual food production. So,
right.
Like, but yes, of course, people in Appalachia, as well as like inner cities and, like the Navajo reservation, there are specific places in the country where there is more of a culture of survival.
Right.
But generally, like 200 years ago, 90% of the U.S. population would have had to have this attitude of scarcity and survival. Whereas today, 90% of Americans do not.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
And I think that is probably the biggest shift, is that, that they have to, like, the stakes are too high. You can't just try. Trying is great. Like, it's great that you're trying, but at the same time, you have to perform. And at a certain point, if the stakes are high enough, trying doesn't matter. Like, if you're trying to get away when there's an explosion or something, you're not fast enough, you die. If you're not good enough shot, your friend gets shot. Like, it's that type of thing. Not that I ever experienced that, because I didn't see any combat, but that is the mentality that's required.
Yeah. Huh. And we're back.
Okay. So we were talking about military culture.
Yep.
I was whining about participation ribbons, like I'm a 70-year-old Republican. That's what I was doing.
Right.
I think I have a good point. I think it's a real thing. It's like, I wish that I had a better example for it, but I think it really is emblematic of like a shift in American culture. And I think I identified it kind of well. I hope.
Well, and like with all public, or not public schooling, but just schooling in general, like when you have a young child and you expose them to a concept about how life functions like that, it's going to have implications down the road that can be bigger than you would think at the time. Does that make sense? Because you're
Right.
establishing their
Yep.
thought process and like you're saying, you're confirming in their mind that it's sufficient to make an attempt. And while you can pray
Right.
as a kid, sure, if your kid kicks a soccer ball and misses the goal, good job, right? But he needs to realize that when he's 20, that's not going to be functional. Like, that's not a good enough goal. He needs to strive to be better than that. But,
right. Yeah, but yes, and it is better for you to strive to be better, but at the same time, there not only is it like it's part of it is the way that you're teaching kids, I think, but part of it is also like their very real interaction with the world and their interaction with adults, because they can see it depending on who their parents are or what their parents do, they can see that maybe their parents are the types of people that are just kind of floating by and they're doing okay.
Sure.
So they see like regardless of what they're being taught, that there's that other element of and this is just in addition to the one that you recognized, is that they see the actions that people take and then the result of those actions, and there's a psychological thing there where they're seeing all these different people and what they're doing and what the result of their actions is. And if nobody is really, if people aren't really trying that hard, but they're fine, then like, what do I have to do? Why am I going to try hard? Right.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. It's so you're saying that has affected the military, because that generation of kid is now joining.
Right. So I think that I think it affects the military in the sense that like the military is made up of individuals, but individuals that have that mentality. But I think that the military kind of requires, certain parts of the military requires that attitude essentially be shifted. They talk a lot in Marine Corps boot camp, especially about tearing you down and building you back up.
Right.
And the point is kind of like to remove all of like what you've learned that was bad before, and then replace it with something else. And this applies to a lot of other things as well. Like, I don't know if you went to college, don't really care. I don't think it's that important. But when you go to college, a lot of what they do in the first year, a lot of professors and even my high school teachers were telling me, yeah, like this is how we're doing it here. This is not how you're going to do it in college. And then you get to college and they're like, you did it this way in high school. We're going to unlearn that. We're going to do it this way. So it's like you go to any situation, or even like archery or marksmanship with shooting. They're like, I've heard so many times that like, if you learned bad habits, it's actually harder to teach you. If I'm teaching a blank slate how to shoot,
right,
it's easier. Not me, but like somebody who's good at shooting.
Right.
Not that I'm a bad shot. Like I'm, average to below average for Marines,
right,
which would put me above the average population, but not good enough. So yeah, but like if they have to unteach you something to teach you something else, that is more difficult than simply teaching something to a blank slate.
Sure.
Yeah.
Huh.
Which I think is probably why they turned clones into soldiers in Star Wars. I think that was probably the idea there.
Simplified the task for sure.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
Huh.
Oh, and you know what?
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of this was the intention of, I don't know if you listened to my episode 25, which was on the history of public education.
Oh, yeah. That warmed my heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Did I even say like illegitimate scholar is the name of my
show?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's okay.
Yeah, and to the listener, I highly recommend it. I mean, it's your presentation is very warm. Like it feels like you're sitting in a very small lecture hall. And I don't have any experience with this, but like that's my impression. It's not like a campfire discussion. You're definitely presenting something as opposed to just like conversational discussion, but it feels very small and intimate. Like you're not speaking to 10,000 people on this topic. I get the impression that you're speaking to like 10 or 20 people, and you know all their names, and you're just presenting information that you've really taken in, and then are giving to them. I don't know exactly. I don't know where I went
No,
with
that's
that,
all right.
but
Thank you so much.
yeah,
That's
it's
actually
really cool.
that's awesome. That might be one of my favorite, if not the favorite things that anyone's ever said about my show, honestly.
Yeah, it's awesome.
But yeah, illegitimate scholar, it's history and anthropology and everything. So episode 25, one of the things that I do, like I look at historical events and I look at the history and the cultural implications of that. So I
Right.
looked into the history of public schools in America and how they were created. And go to the podcast Illegitimate Scholar episode 25,
Yeah.
how public education was
Designed to keep you dumb.
education was designed to keep you dumb.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a ripper.
It's actually it's I think my second or third most popular episode is that one.
Well,
Yeah.
the title just draws you in. They're like either in I like this guy, or in this guy's retarded. I'm going to listen to what he has to say so I can be.
And I want both of them.
That's great.
I want both of them.
Right.
Yeah. I say in a lot of my episodes, like in the middle, I'm like, look, you probably agree with this. If you don't agree with what I'm saying, then I appreciate you listening, and please keep listening. I will make a good argument. I promise.
Right.
Yeah. So, but the episode, it goes into how, like, the Carnegie Foundation and the General Education Board, which was created by Rockefeller, they got millions of dollars in funding, which today adds up to be billions of dollars in funding. And they funded these organizations that changed public education. And they turned public education, it was essentially created at this point. They made it into, they explicitly say this in quotes that this was the intention. But they turned public education into the U.S. through this funding that they gave to all these different educational organizations and creating their own and infiltrating the National Educators Association, the labor union. They made education match a factory and prepare Americans for factory life.
Right.
And so, like, what they recognized is there was a lot of places in the country where, like, New England was not like this, because New England has always had public education. And that's where I'm from. So, like, in the 17th century, like 1630s, Connecticut and Massachusetts, they have schools. Like, they're getting attacked by Native Americans. They're in, like, annihilation wars, and they have public schools, like, within 3 years of landing. It's crazy. And everybody is getting educated, at least to be able to read, so that they can read the Bible. But most of the country into the 19th century is not like that. And there are people that are in, like, farms. They work on farms, and they don't need to go to high school. They don't really even go to middle school there, because it's not necessary. And what they were finding is, in this industrialized country, they're trying to take these, free spirit farm country people, and they're trying to turn them into factory workers. And it just doesn't work. Like, it's harder to do. So what they did was they designed public education with the ringing of the bells to change classrooms, with the sitting in rows for lunch, with all of this regimented thing, and sitting still and listening to the authoritarian person at the front of the classroom. They made it to match and prepare kids for their eventual life of being factory workers.
Right.
And that was a cultural thing that they instilled from them from a very young age. And that's the intention. The intention was to create good factory workers.
Is that similar to what they call the Prussian model?
So,
I've heard these terms.
Right. So the Prussian model, it has elements of the Prussian model, but the Prussian model was adopted in the 1830s in the United States, in Connecticut and Massachusetts again. And the Prussian model did spread around to the rest of the country. Things generally in education, they just start in New England and they spread. That's been true for most of American history for education. And it went to a lot of the country, but the model, there was other models as well.
Okay.
The Prussian model was one of them. It was, I think, the main one, but this new system does replace the Prussian model.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Prussian model had elements of this. That the Prussian model was born out of, like, early nationalism in Prussia, which became Prussia, which became Germany.
Right.
So Prussia is a German state that unites other German states militarily and through diplomacy, and they become Germany in the 19th century. but they were known as being very militaristic, very nationalistic. So this was like a very regimented. So there are, yes, elements of that, but the new model comes out of that Prussian model, and it doesn't happen until the early 20th century.
Okay.
Some in the late 19th. Yeah. Yeah. If I, you mind if I read a quote?
Yeah, please.
So I can,
please go for it.
Yeah. So this comes from, and there's a bunch of quotes that I'll read in the episode if you listen to it. Illegitimate Scholar 25, how public schools were designed to make us dumb. But in our dream, we have, this comes from Reverend Frederick T. Gates, who was the business advisor to John D. Rockefeller. He ran a lot of John D. Rockefeller's companies. He was basically his number 2 guy. And he ran this organization as well, the General Education Board. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. The present educational conventions, like the Prussian model, fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise up among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians. Nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. And that was the guy who was running the organization that funded and created in a lot of places the American public education system. And he says in black and white, and other people do as well, about like what it was intended to do. You can't, it's hard to find this information now. I had to dig for it. Because when you Google the Carnegie Foundation and you Google the General Education Board, all of the first results come from organizations and colleges that are praising them.
Right.
As
for sure.
These organizations and their descendant organizations are the ones that are funding a lot of education. And even today, those and other organizations like the Gates Foundation fund a lot of public education for political gain. And that is for political and personal gain. And that was the finding of the 1953 Dodd Report as well, that studied the influence. That was a congressional report that came out in 1953 about the influence of specifically the Carnegie Foundation and the General Education Board and the Ford Foundation, I think.
Sure.
No, the Ford Foundation was not specifically named, but it was, basically the same thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. It's
so
yeah, go ahead.
It's culture is like, the reason this is so powerful is because if you can change how someone views the world, if you can change how they interact with the world through the social constructs that they grow up in, and especially as early as being a child, you can instill in them, the values that benefit you in the future as a one of these fat cat guys.
Right.
And that's the best way to do it, is to change mentality, because at that point, if you want them to do something, you don't have to convince them, because they already have the lines of thinking that lead them to think in the way that benefits you the most. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Wordy,
yeah. Well, and correct me if I'll submit this to you for discussion, but I remember years ago hearing someone say that like a layman's definition of the study of culture could be boiled down to a study of norms and values, what a culture finds normal and what they value. And so
absolutely.
And okay, so if you're as a child, if you're being instructed in different norms and different forms of value, or different settings of value. I can't think of the term, but valuing, if you're being instructed to value different things than normal, it's going to adjust your culture and how those externalize themselves.
Absolutely. And I think that people are not really honest about the extent to which culture does shift the way that you think, because today I see people talk about something like human rights, and they talk about it almost as an immutable thing. But human rights, the concept of human rights is a socially constructed idea, and that means it's constructed by the way that we interact with the world, and it's constructed in a very specific way. And the best way that I like to think about this is that archaeologists keep finding older versions of modern humans. A few years ago, they found a anatomically modern human, which means their brain fully developed, either the same or very similar to ours today, 300,000 years ago. And they used to think it was maybe 150. It keeps getting pushed back as they find new specimens. But what that means is that human beings in the Neolithic, the new Stone Age, the Paleolithic, the first Stone Age, and even prior to that, were the same as we are today. And what that means is that all of these civilizations across the world, regardless of where they are, unless you're somebody that believes in like inherent large racial differences between different like ethnicities of humans, which I don't believe in. I don't think that's true. I think there are differences clearly, because there's differences in skin color, noses, whatever, height, things like that. There are differences, but still people are generally the same, right? They're generally the same across cultures and across time. So then think about like the Aztecs or the Mongols or Alexander the Great. Like the Mongols, they murdered millions of people. They didn't have like their concept of consent, Genghis Khan, trigger warning, sexual assault, whatever. But like Genghis Khan is, I mean, I warn people when I talk about this stuff because it is rough.
Right.
Genghis Khan is like, in the writings of Genghis Khan, like the writings from the time, when they talk about him forcing himself on a woman, they write he made her his wife. And that is because in their culture, their concept of like, their idea is that, and this was very common throughout the ancient world, to be honest, throughout most of the world for most of human history, if you conquer a people, you have the right to the women, the men, the children. You own them. The men and the women and the children, they often become slaves. The women as property, you can like use them sexually how you would anything because they belong to you. So it doesn't say that he forced himself on her. It says that he made her his wife, which is like, that's their concept of that. They don't have a similar concept to consent that we had. And those were anatomically modern humans. Those were humans with the same brain as you. And that's horrible. There's no way around it that like from the way that I interact with the world from 2023, the way I've grown up, I think that's disgusting and terrible and inhuman, but it's very human. It's very, very human.
And was probably seen as a mark of his power and greatness. And this is something to emulate.
Right.
And now we're in our culture, we're like, jail,
right.
or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. It's crazy. And even like other places today, like Mongolia has a giant statue of Genghis Khan. You wouldn't do that in America. Like it's
we're tearing down statues from, less than 200 years ago.
Right. Like none of them, like, George Washington right there.
Right.
None of the founding fathers, some of them weren't great dudes, but like none of them did anything like Genghis Khan.
Right.
I mean, the guy was out of his mind, but like that was their culture. Right.
Right.
And if you look at other cultures today, I mean, most cultures in the world think differently than Western culture. Go to Iran and try to show your hair. There was that big thing where they murdered that Kurdish woman, but in their culture, it was at least somewhat acceptable to do that. Obviously, there were protests, and I'm glad there were. But the cultural ideas that form your worldview, they affect you a lot more than people are willing to admit. It was like the human rights thing. Back to that. It's, we have our conception about human rights, but that's formed by like our upbringing, our schooling, and things like that. It's not immutable. And it seems like people think it is. So your definition of culture that you had, really good, but let me read you two other really simple ones. There's this one is from Handworker, an archaeologist, and there are more complex views than this,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I got two simple
As with
ones.
any subject of academic interest.
Right, but that's the thing. It's like my show is the illegitimate scholar. I'm like, this stuff does not need to be complicated. The
Oh,
professors, they complicate it on purpose a lot of the time.
Sure.
They, you read an academic paper, they're just like they're throwing out 17 syllable words for no reason. Like it doesn't it like I can read it, it's hard, but like it's dumb and it doesn't need to be that way. I'm trying to do anthropology for the people, right? Like this stuff can reach individuals. So that's why I try to make it, breaking things down to their most simple is the best way to do anything, I think.
So not to interrupt, but talking,
Yeah.
you were saying the professors use unnecessarily large and complex words. Do you think that, speaking of being inculcated from a youth, do you think what percentage of that do you think stems from having to submit, say, a 500-word essay and just having to fill out those 500 words with words?
I don't know.
As opposed, and some it could just be academia. It's like, oh, the smarter you are, the bigger the words you use. But I don't.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat encouraged in like public school, like to write in that way to sound like more intellectual or whatever. But like it definitely gets worse in college.
Okay.
Like I read some of these essays and I'm like, it's just they're unnecessarily complicated. They're so unnecessarily complicated. And I've had to like train myself out of like talking like that sometimes. Like I'll use big words if it helps, like if it's necessary.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's usually not that necessary.
But sorry, you were saying the definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I took us down a rabbit trail.
No, that's good. That's fine. Like, and
yeah.
Okay. So here's the definition.
Okay.
The knowledge people use to live their lives and the way in which they do so.
Oh.
Okay. So a lot of people talk about culture like it's just music or art or whatever, but those are manifestations of culture. Culture is really like, culture can be like a driver's license, bureaucracy, the court system. These are all socially constructed things that are part of how we live our lives. So, is another thing. And the second definition, this is from the National Park Service. A system of behaviors, including economic, religious, and social, beliefs, values, ideologies, and social arrangements. So, religions are an aspect of culture. They guide the way you live your life. Confucianism in China, that's a aspect of culture. It guides the way that there are social interactions between people. Beliefs, values, ideologies, woke ideology, critical race theory. These are social constructs. These are aspects of culture. Economic capitalism is an aspect of culture. It's like the idea that a dollar bill is worth money is an aspect of culture. You bring that dollar bill to South Sentinel Island, they're gonna look at it and they're gonna stab you, like they did to that fucking Asian dude who was a missionary.
Right. Yeah.
It's a social construct. It's not, all of these things are social constructs. Yeah, I tend to say the word social construct in my interviews, like, all the time. Like that's the word. It's socially constructed. And when I say socially constructed, I mean that like sexual reproduction is immutable. Okay, that's not culture. That's just human. That is animal. But social construction is basically everything else. The government is a social construction. Your schools are a social construction. Your
fashions,
the bank, monetary fashions are a social construction. Absolutely. Fashion shifts, hairstyles shift over time. You're rocking this. I love your facial hair. Love it. You got a mullet back there too?
I avoid the shaved sides, but yeah, other than that, it kind of looks like it. Yeah.
Nice. Sick. I had one pretty recently too, because the mullets came back. I think Theo Vaughn brought it back.
Oh yeah.
The 80s is back,
Yep. We're back, baby.
Yeah, it really is. I love it. And that's a social construction. That's culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. But yeah,
See,
the
and
national parks definition. What's the deal there?
so a system of behaviors.
Sure.
So it's a system of behaviors. It's like normal behavior, like what's acceptable. It's like, you go back to the Apache, Plains Indian tribes. They were a raiding culture. They believed that you could, run up on somebody, steal their wife, steal their horses, kill them, take their stuff. That's what they believed. That was good in their society.
Right.
And having a lot of horses in Apache culture and other Plains Indian culture, that was associated with wealth.
Right.
Whereas, today you run up on somebody and you steal their horse or their car and you steal their wife, people are going to be like, number one, women aren't property. What the hell are you doing?
Right.
Number two, you can't take people's cars. And like, what are you doing? Go to jail.
Right.
Which is a social construct. Jail is a social construct. The idea of stealing is social construct. The idea of consent is a social construct, terrifyingly enough.
And nowadays, if you steal a horse, you return it or pay it back or go to jail. But as everybody knows from reading Western novels, in the Old West, if you stole a horse, they could kill you.
Yep.
And this is the difference there.
It's a capital crime.
Because of the needs of the time. Yeah.
Right.
Huh.
And that made sense at the time because a horse back then, not only to, right. And I love that you brought that up because 19th century Apache, horses are a symbol of their culture. They're very important to their culture. So like the wealth of you is associated with how many horses you have. But it was the same for the white people.
Sure.
In that area.
Sure.
Because horses were so important to them. Because so if you took someone's horse, that's death. It has to be capital punishment because it's a thing that could kill somebody and it's a thing that could destroy somebody. So you can't do it.
Right.
Yeah. So guidelines, a system of behaviors, economic, religious, and social beliefs, values, ideologies, and social arrangements. And it's dynamic. It's dynamic, which means that culture is always changing. That's why in the Old West, 150 years ago, during the Indian Wars, you could just kill Native Americans. You were just allowed to because they might just kill you.
Sure.
There's an annihilation war going on between these two ethnicities.
Right.
That's not true anymore. You kill a Native American, I hope that you get arrested. Right. I think there is, to bring up contemporary Native American stuff, I try to bring because one time I was speaking to a Native American guy who I had randomly met, and I love to talk about history. I'm a big history buff. So I'm talking about Native American history. And he says to me, he was like, I love that you're talking about the history. I love that you talk about it, but please, please, please remember that we're still here. So whenever I talk about Native American stuff, yeah,
that's a good point.
Seriously. And it like he said that and I was like, whoa, shit, you're right. I'm talking about you in the past tense while I'm talking to you.
Right.
And I told him hey, I love history. So I would talk to a French guy about French history. But at the same time with this, French people are in media all the time. They don't need it.
Right.
So contemporary Native Americans, I think there has been a problem in regards in recent years, the past few decades, where there's a loophole between jurisdictions where Native American women are murdered at a rate higher than any other woman by ethnicity and gender in the U.S.
Right.
So that is still a problem. But I would hope that today you can't just kill a Native American and get away with it. And in most cases, you probably can't. But unfortunately,
sure.
I have to bring up that loophole and talk about it because whenever I bring up Native Americans, I also have to talk about contemporary Native American issues.
Yeah.
Because I always have him telling me that in the back of my head. I'm like, I can't do it. If I bring up Native Americans, which I do a lot, I have to bring up contemporary.
Yeah. Huh.
But that actually overlapping jurisdictions and law systems and how they work, that's also culture, and there are gaps that are created in that culture sometimes, and groups that are able to advocate for themselves within social constructs are going to be the ones that are able to create the rules that favor them, which is why today what you see is, the ruling class, donor class, whatever you want to call them, capitalist class. And when I say the capitalists, I don't mean people that believe in capitalism. I mean people with the capital,
right,
with the money. They create, if they have control of a social construct, they not only create the rules by which we live our lives, which create things like the fact that in 2008, all of these criminals committed all these financial crimes. I think one low-level guy from Jersey goes to prison. and no one else does. And then,
Right.
there's dudes from like South Central LA that are in prison for selling a gram of marijuana.
Right.
That's where those things come from. It's how, like, Trump might get indicted, but Epstein's client list is still sealed and those pedophiles aren't arrested.
Right.
It's like that type of thing.
Right. And the dichotomy that sets up in people's minds, because they, even if they don't acknowledge it, they know that it's happening. Right. And it messes with your brain, I think.
But the social constructs of like our schools, they create the perception that we have that they create the perception that we have that this is not okay, but this is okay because it's done by men and women in suits rather than, gangbangers or rednecks.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
If you look at Putin right now, look at Russia. What Putin is doing in Ukraine is horrible. Right?
Sure.
But is it more horrible than what the US did in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen? I don't know.
Right.
I don't think it is. I think it's probably as horrible, but there's the perception of like the people that have control of the news media. They present it in a certain way, and the way that we grow up in schooling, we're essentially taught explicitly or implicitly, I'm not sure which, different in certain cases, that it's okay for America to go in. It's justified for America to do these things,
sure,
but it's not justified for Putin to do these things.
Sure.
And that's, there's a dichotomy there.
It's interesting. I was just, because when I was listening to one of your episodes last night, it made me think how if in that situation you present somebody with a situation that they agree is bad and then a situation that they believe is justifiable, and you compare the two, you say these are very similar in their minds. In your mind, you're saying, look at this bad thing that you acknowledge is bad. It's similar to this thing that you think is good. This thing that you think is good is also bad. But in their minds, they hold what they think is good as so important that when you say and compare it to this bad thing, they think you're trying to justify the bad thing and make it seem good. Does that make sense? So they're working, right. Their brain's working opposite. Because I often try to talk with people like that, like, look at this and look at that, and then they respond with emotion. And I realized just listening to you last night that it's because they're thinking that I'm trying to say this bad thing is good and we should try to emulate it. And I'm saying, no. This good thing is bad. And at least acknowledge it. You don't have to change your mind. But look, like apples, I think you said apples and oranges are both fruit, right? I think you said, I heard you say that somewhere. It's just like, they're not the same thing, but they are very similar.
Right.
Anyways, I'm sorry.
Right. And they can, no, you're good. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm going for. And that's why I break things down to their most basic. Because what university professors and everybody does, they overcomplicate things to the point where they can justify it through their systems of how they interact with the world, how universities think about things. So like that's what happens. This has always happened, that the people that are in charge of justifying things are like the people in the universities, or like it would have been monks in the past. Like, Henry VIII got like a priest. They like Henry VIII, when he wanted to divorce his wife in England, they kidnapped a priest and they tortured him in order for him to come out and create an ecclesiastical justification for for his divorce. This is as old as information.
Right.
I'm sure in 500 BC that like there was some pagan dude in like Celtic Brittany or Celtic Britain that was like, grabbing the local medicine man and like being like, hey, I'm going to kill you if you don't back me up on this spiritually. I'm sure that was happening.
And I want you to manipulate the people to say what I'm doing is good. Yeah,
absolutely.
There's no modern parallels to that.
No, that happened back then. We're different now. In 1956, human beings became a different thing. That's what happened.
Right.
No, dude. Same monkey brain, bro. Right. Come on. Yeah, so that's why I break things down to their most basic, because like through the logic of social constructs, it like they narrow your mind. Like they narrow your mind towards a specific idea, towards a specific way of thinking. And if you allow your mind to be taken over by that social construct, and this happens a lot, especially the more schooling people go through, that it prevents you from thinking about things just as a human, because you're always viewing them through the lens of Eurocentric, Western centric universities and the way that they teach things. And a lot of these people that talk like this, they're the first ones to be like, I'm not Eurocentric, I'm not American centric, because I believe in diversity. But their idea of it is like, saying things like, have you heard the term Latin X?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, they're like, it's the right thing to do to say Latin X, but like, most Hispanic people haven't even heard of this term.
Right.
They don't know what it is. But like, because their worldview says that, like, okay, the guy in the front of the classroom, the woman at the front of the classroom, they know best, they're smartest, but they're just up there because they were chosen by the social construct.
Right.
Whereas, like, it's different from, like, something like podcasting, where like people just listen to you because they want to listen to you.
Right.
It's not the same thing. Like,
Right.
a lot of these professors, they're so boring and they have such basic ideas that are just they're like towing the company line, and they get put in the front of a classroom. They might be saying something to the kids and everyone's like, fuck this guy.
Right.
But because of their position in the social construct, not because people want to listen to them, then they are up there. Right. And they get to continue.
And the kid's grade depends on the teacher liking them to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Or at least fulfilling the requirements.
That actually reminds me of what you were saying before. You were talking about how, like, they think this thing is good. I had my professor, when I was in education college, I was to be a history teacher. My advisor, he hated me. He absolutely hated me, because I mean, he would do things to me that I thought were disrespectful, and I'm like, well, I don't give a shit. I'm gonna fuck with him back.
Right.
And I did. I antagonized him back. So that, like, there's my part in that. But I think that he abused his authority in the ways that he treated me initially and then in response.
Sure.
But that's a normative culture that, like, an institution like a university, a professor, somebody who has a doctorate, they're a doctor, right? Okay. They are treated by the social institution as somebody who's, like, socially above other people. So the fact that, like, I don't do that anymore. Like, anybody, like, my consciousness is not equal or better. It is not better or worse than your consciousness for any human being. Okay. Because if I think that my consciousness is better than your consciousness, if I think me as a person is better than you as a person, because of who I am, as in my position in a social construct or something, because of the amount of money I have, because of where I'm from, then I'm already, when you do that, you are giving in to the social constructs that have created the value system that you hold, where you judge people. And I don't care if you have a college degree. I don't call people doctor. I don't call people by ranks. I don't call people any of this stuff. If anybody tried to tell me to call them doctor, I would tell them no. I'm not going to do that. I don't recognize the social institution that has told you that you deserve to be called a doctor by greater society. I don't recognize their authority, so I don't recognize your title.
Sure. Well, especially when you recognize that, to a large extent, a college degree is merely a certificate of time spent and not necessarily knowledge gained.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Huh. Or the ability to impart it with any kind of understanding.
Right. Seriously. And, like, I know many people who have college degrees, and I know many people without college degrees. And I wouldn't say that the people who have college degrees that I know are any bit smarter than the ones I know without.
Right.
Like, it's not that they're smarter. It's that they have gone through, like, if our idea of intelligence was based on how well you could take care of a car, then going to an auto mechanic school would be the number one. But, like, the colleges, the universities, the schools, they decide what being intelligent means. So, of course, the people who go to these universities and schools are going to have the traits after being indoctrinated, instructed in this social construct that would lead them to be more intelligent by the metric that university decides. It's like, of course you are. But no, I don't view it that way. I don't recognize the authority of a university, even in the case of a physician, to decide that somebody deserves to be called doctor. In certain cases, if I respect the individual, I will call them by doctor or professor, but in most, I won't. Especially if that person insists on it. If you insist on being called a doctor, I bet that you're a fucking huge loser. I really do. Like, whether you're a physician or a PhD, like, if you value that piece of paper and your time spent there that much that you think that I need to give you a specific title based on that, then like, I don't think I really want to talk to you if you're not going to listen to me when I say that I'm not going to call you a doctor.
Right. Similar, kind of similar to like guys that have been in the military and find their value in the uniform, it's across the board. There's all kinds of deals, but yeah, just like you need to value yourself more than just the labels that people put on you. Right.
I actually, a few months ago, I was accidentally put into a group chat with some Marines. And like, I've been out of the Marine Corps for 6 years.
Right.
And I was put in a group chat with a bunch of Marines I didn't know. And I guess it was the staff NCOs, which is like the high up enlisted, and the officers of a specific battalion of Marines. And I won't name it.
Sure.
And I responded to the group chat, and I in the group chat, I talked like I normally talk. And I swore in the text because I swear, and it's Marines. So like, I'm not like concerned. Like, it's not a random number. I know it's Marines. So I'm like, oh, it's fine. I don't think anything of it. I text back. I think I'm just like letting them know. I read it back afterwards, and I realized like it could be interpreted as aggressive.
Sure.
But like, I wrote to it. I'm like, hey, I don't know how the fuck this happened, but like, I've been out for a few years. My name was Corporal this. You guys, Corporal Urban. You guys might have somebody with the last name Urban. I'm just letting you know I'm not him.
Right. Sure.
So apparently it was a bunch of officers and staff NCOs, and they wrote back. But from this guy, so the senior enlisted of the battalion, a sergeant major, he writes back in there, and he's kind of a dick to me. He responds, and he's like, hey, you didn't have to use that language or like say these things. Like, you could have just told, all you had to do was simply tell us you're not supposed to be in this. And like, he talked to me like I was a corporal.
Right.
And I am not a corporal. I was a corporal.
Right.
I'm not even in the inactive reserve. I'm a civilian. So he writes back to me, and to me, I'm like, okay, I'm talking to another man. I'm talking to another human being.
Sure.
That's my mentality. I don't care that he's a sergeant major, just like I don't care that someone's a doctor. That doesn't play into my mind. But in his mind, even though I'm out of the Marine Corps, I'm still a corporal. I'm still below him. I still should not be speaking to him and the other officers in the casual way that I was.
Right.
And he got even more mad when I responded, and I was like, one of the things that I said was like, oh, like, I was really sarcastic, and I was like, I responded with like, oh, I'm sorry for offending your precious sensibilities by saying fuck. I didn't realize the Corps really had softened that much. And he sent something else, and I wrote back fucking with him more. And eventually I get a personal text. I get a text just from that number, not the group chat, that starts with, listen here, fuck stick. Which I thought was the funniest thing ever. But
you're like, your knife hand isn't coming across the text. I'm sorry.
Yeah, like, dude, what are you gonna do? And he starts threatening to like beat my ass and shit. And I'm like, dude, like, this guy's a sergeant major. He's threatening to beat up a civilian that's just fucking with him.
Right.
Like, what's he doing? But like, I start responding to him, and I was like, ooh, you really like me. I started acting like he was a gay guy attracted to me, and I was like, damn, you must really like me. I was like, you can ask me out on a date, like,
right.
shit like that to him. And I tried to call him, like, I tried to call his number. And he hung up, like, he wouldn't answer it. And he was like, I'm about to get on a plane. I'll call you back after, or I'll answer after.
Right.
He never texted me again. Right. I think he got on the plane, and like, he was on the plane for 2 hours. Then he was like, that was really dumb that I argued with that dude.
Right. Reality set in.
Like, yeah, I'm not going to tell you his name. I mean, I looked the guy up. Like, he was telling me he was going to beat my ass. And like, I'm like, yeah, he probably would beat my ass.
Is he nearby?
This guy would beat the crap out of me. No, he was in North Carolina.
Right.
But like, I'm not going to look him up. I'm not going to see if he will beat my ass. I don't want that to happen.
Right.
Because like, I don't think I'd stand a chance against this guy. He's a big meathead who'd fuck me up. But like, you know, like you're just gonna assault me. Like I'm gonna get like hopefully you don't kill me. I'll get the cops. Like it's not. This isn't a situation where I'm going to agree to fight you over this, man. Like,
and that's the maybe not him specifically, but that mentality is the type where when they get out, they lose a lot of purpose because so much of their value is from the uniform, and they're so accustomed to that, the culture and the ability to talk to subordinates like that, and then they get out, and now they're just a dude. Like you're saying, you're confident in just being a civilian because you have skills, you have knowledge, you're willing.
And I was only in for 4 years. This guy's been in for his whole adult life.
Yeah. So then he gets out, and it's just like, where do I go now? You know, and so it's very understandable if he continues as a civilian with that being his primary identifier in life.
Right. And that's unfortunate. You know, a lot of guys, like, especially guys that are in for that long, like a sergeant major. I mean, that sergeant major, he's going to retire soon because 30 years is essentially the max for enlisted Marines, enlisted anything in the military. And like, you know, I worry about guys like him. They have a pretty high suicide rate, and they have, So it's rough because they go from like, and it's, you see this as well, just with people retiring from their jobs. But yeah, it's you have to have other things that define you as an individual. And like, I don't like this sergeant major. I'm not surprised by the way that he acted, because he really believes, like he truly believed that he was in the right because he's a sergeant major and I was a corporal, and that I shouldn't be talking to him or these officers in that way. And he believed it was his responsibility as a sergeant major to reprimand me for what I said, even though like, to me, I'm like, dude, like I'm an individual that just fucked with your whole group chat. Like I'm just in there fucking with you guys. It's not your responsibility to do anything about this. Like I'm just a random dude. But from his perspective, as a sergeant major, he needs to defend the officers. Right. Like that's what the sergeant major does. He defends. He's a senior enlisted for the CO. If somebody fucks with the CO, the sergeant major is the bulldog that's either going to do it himself or he's going to get a staff sergeant, a sergeant to do it. Right. Like, so he, in his mind, he needed to do something about that. Whereas in my mind, and I'm not willing to play by his rules. I get why he did what he did. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to live my life the way I'm going to. And I'm certainly, like, I spent 4 years listening to these fucking people. And I did what I was told.
Right. You knew what was going through his mind.
Right. I knew exactly what was going through his mind. But, you know, I did not have to just swallow my pride and tuck my tail anymore. And I certainly wasn't going to do it to make this guy feel more comfortable. This insecure fucking dude. Right. Like, I'm not going to do that. Yeah.
And so right there, you're saying there's, or not you're saying, but there's an example of different cultures, like something that's completely acceptable for him. And he can, especially in person, it is common for him to interact with people this way. And for you understand it. But like, if that happened to me or just a civilian who never been in the military, you're like, what? Like, where do you get off? You know, what's going on?
Like the guy, like the way that he was talking to me and the way that he was acting and like threatening to beat my ass, it was like, I totally get it. Like I'm not surprised by that at all. Like I've seen it hundreds of times. Right. But like, yeah, but looking at it from a civilian, you're like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? Like he's acting crazy. Right. But that is like acceptable. It's, you know, it's almost acceptable for staff NCOs in the Marine Corps, especially, like to basically throw temper tantrums like that. That's what they are. I mean, you can look at them as like, oh, they're getting mad. And like, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to like, you know, throw stuff around and scream at people and knife hand and scream at them and sometimes hit people. Right. But like, if you look at it from the outside, if you don't have that military mindset, it's like, yeah, you're throwing a temper tantrum. Like you're allowing your emotions. A lot of the time they're allowing their emotions to get the better of them. And they've been taught that that's okay. And it is, because it's incentivized by the organization and the culture itself. But in American culture, in most places, that's not true. Like that's not how it is. Yeah.
I just realized that senior NCOs are a little bit like women in that it's rarely a good idea to tell them to calm down.
Ah, yeah. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And if you had said that to a staff NCO, they'd get red in the face.
I bet, dude. It would not be a good day.
No, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. You know, happy wife, happy life, happy staff NCO, happy life.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. just like with, as a man, as a straight man with a woman in your life, they're your staff NCO. It's actually a lot of people in the military, a lot of men in the military refer to their wives as the sergeant major or the CO as a metaphor. That you're really on that. Like,
right.
Yeah, like that's a thing. They're like, they literally refer to their wives as the sergeant major or whatever rank it is, or like
Yeah, I've heard people
and
call
it makes
them
sense.
like the XO. I think somebody once said, "Yeah, I got to check with the XO." I was like,
exactly.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
It makes sense. Like they're in charge. Like I do the same thing. I think when I was talking to you about this, I was like, "Hey, I'm pretty much free whenever, but I got to check with the old lady." Like
You're right, exactly.
Yeah. It's like the same thing. It's and obviously I wouldn't, if I talked to my girlfriend in the same way that I talked to this sergeant major, I'd be in a shitload of trouble. So it is a very apt comparison.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, the couch would be warm that night.
Yeah, good thing for me that I have a very, very nice couch.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's One question I try to ask everybody. What would your advice be to a 17-year-old kid who came to you and said, "I'm planning on joining the military"?
Yeah, I had prompted myself. Let me look at what I had written down. I think I remember, but too many papers. Sorry. Okay, yeah. So what I had a really rough time in the, like, I finished, I didn't get in any serious trouble. I didn't get reduced in rank. I never got like any official like reprimands. I got in a little bit of trouble. I was a little uppity at certain points, but I never gotten anything serious. But
sure.
I didn't have like, it was rough for me. I didn't like, I was unhappy a lot of the time in the Marine Corps. I'm glad I did it. And there were a lot of great times as well. Very intense, made me who I am today. I was only able to go to college because of the GI Bill, which was great. Has set me up financially as well as like personally with my personal growth.
Sure.
Anybody that's thinking about joining, like, I would say that it's hard, but it's worth it. It really is worth it. If it matches with your goals in life, like I would definitely say join. And you don't, joining the military doesn't mean that you're going to be shooting people. It almost definitely doesn't mean that.
Right.
Like if you want to do that, if you want to be the guy, like if you're someone who wants to shoot people, don't join the military, number one. But if you're somebody who is interested in being in combat, being in that intense type situation, being a part of a team like that, then yeah, join the Marine Corps or join the Army and join a specific combat arms MOS. But if you're somebody who wants to be in like a team-oriented environment, learn how to learn skills, be like, wear a uniform, be part of something big, which is a huge part of being a human. It's a massive part of being a human. By all means, join the military, do logistics, be a sailor, like learn a specific skill that you want to do, or just do whatever and like enjoy it and like do your time, deploy, see the world, like join the Air Force, join like a non-combat job in the Army, like there's so many things that you can do in the military. The benefits are unparalleled for anybody who's 18 and going to college, or 18 and finishing high school.
Sure.
I mean, like a lot of people that at the same time, like I think a lot of people, especially like I come from suburban New England, so I'm from like there's a lot of like it's an affluent place in a lot of
sure.
in a lot of ways. So a lot of people look down on, especially enlisting in the military, but like it isn't like you're not going to get in there as a high school dropout. You're not going to get in there with like if you're not in enough shape. You're not going to get in if you are being treated for serious like mental health issues on certain medications. Childhood asthma, I don't think is like, it's not disqualifying, but like adult asthma is. So I think a few years ago, it was something like only 30% of the military age population was actually eligible to join. So it's not, it's not like the military is not just a backup plan. Like, you know, maybe if you're intending on going to MIT, then yeah, maybe the military, enlisting in the military is a backup plan. But like, it's harder to get into the military than it is to college. It's not harder to get into the military than it is to get into Harvard, but like the equivalent of like a community college that almost anyone can get into is the equivalent of like, if that's the equivalent of the lowest level, the easiest job in the military to get into, then you're talking about like, you know, probably the Army. No offense, Army, but they're the most general and the largest.
Right.
You know, being like an admin guy in the Army or a supply guy in the Army, that's like, you're still only 30% of the US population is qualified to do that. Whereas basically 100% of the population is qualified to go to community college. And then compared to like, you know, MIT, Harvard, Yale, these Ivy League schools, they have like a 5% acceptance rate. If you look at the most elite units in the U.S. military, you're looking at like pilots, Navy SEALs, MARSOC, Air Force pararescue, much lower than 5%. You know, the military in all aspects, where you compare them to the college and other areas of life, it's the hardest thing that you could possibly do. It's, you know, it's not the easiest thing. Like, you know, what I did becoming a Marine, you know, probably comparable to like a decently good school, but being a Navy SEAL is harder than getting into Harvard. It's hard. It's way hard. It's harder in more aspects.
Yeah.
So like, but the benefits are real. I mean, you go, you get paid, you have like, my first few months in, like, I just saved all of my money. Like I spent, like I was saving 80% of my income.
Yeah.
Like you don't make very much money, but all of your expenses are paid for. So people get broke in the military, but it's because they don't have the financial literacy. It's not because they're not being paid enough, or they have to like, or they're married and they have to pay for their.
It's that old 12.5 APR on that sweet Mustang.
Yeah, that awesome V6 Mustang.
Yeah,
God, seriously, that's a thing. Yeah. But no, I recommend it. I recommend it. And it's, if you do it right, you take it seriously, it's 4 years. Yeah. All your friends are going to go off to college and most of them are going to go into a lot of debt. If you're like, unless you're upper middle class or rich and your parents are paying for your school, you had like a rich grandparent who died and is paying for your school. Like I went 4 years in the Marine Corps, saved a lot of money, got some investments, got out, got the GI Bill, went to school for a year, or went to school for 4 years, got 3 college degrees. I got to go on a study abroad that they paid for in Scotland. I got to do a archaeological field school for free where I did archaeology. I was getting paid a stipend while I did it.
Right.
Like, look, the military, like anything else, like college, is what you make it. And you can make it into something incredible. I got to go to all over the Middle East, the friendly parts of the Middle East. Look, if you join the Marine Corps or like most jobs in the Army, like, yeah, you might be in combat. And if that's what you want to do, go for it.
Right.
Again, if you are someone that wants to kill people, please stay away from the military. We don't want you. They don't want you. Not me anymore.
Right.
But like, they literally ask you, like, obviously there are people who join the military who are like psychopaths, probably a higher percentage than the average population. But like, if you're dumb enough to tell them in the interview that you have that, like, oh yeah, I want to kill people, I really want to feel what it's like to kill a person, nah, you're out immediately.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many things to do too. There's the different branches, there's different jobs in different branches that you can do. There's something for everybody. And it, as long as you're qualified for it, which you're likely not, because less than half of people are, but if you're qualified for it, or you're willing to do the things to get qualified for it, then do it. And don't listen. If you're from an affluent place like me, if you're from the suburbs of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, or anywhere else, and the people around you are looking down on people joining the military, like, just don't listen to them. They're the types of motherfuckers that are going to go $100,000 in debt getting a fucking gender studies degree where there's no jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of respect for colleges, if that's not clear, or public
I had no
education.
idea.
Yeah. Clearly, I had to make that explicit.
Right. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I appreciate the sentiment for sure.
yeah, good. That's why I am the illegitimate scholar
Yeah,
rather than the legitimate scholar,
right,
because
right.
I'm not legitimized by any organization.
Yeah, and that's the beauty and the risk of like podcasting, for example. You were saying how people listen to podcast shows because they like the person or they like what's being said, and there is the potential to learn information that is intentionally not being shared by the corporate press or by the
Right.
corporate education system. But there's also the risk that you'll be listening to complete gobbledygook, and so you're forced to assess what you're being taught, as opposed to the college system where you're inherently taught to absorb and not what's the word I just said, not
Absorb.
assess it.
Assess it. Yeah, right.
You participate in the process
Right.
without judging the process, and then that just leads to defense of the process.
Right.
Right.
Right. And it defends the people who rise to the top of their respective fields. And it creates situations where sometimes, because professors, they get married to ideas, their own ideas. And if there's a powerful professor who is like the most respected person in a field, as an example from anthropology, Margaret Mead, who was at a certain point a few decades ago, she was the most prominent anthropologist likely in the world, but definitely in the United States.
Sure.
And she had done her dissertation under another very prominent anthropologist, cultural anthropologist. And she had done, at the time, she was a woman, and this was like, I think, the 50s, and she was in a traditional culture, and she did an ethnography project on, I think, in Polynesia or Melanesia, on like the dating practices. And actually, this was the 60s, the dating practices of this culture. And essentially what happened is she was there for a few months, and all of these older teenage girls just made up shit to her. They just made stuff up. And she publishes in America her dissertation. It becomes very popular. I think she writes a book on it. It's like about the free love in Polynesia. But
and these girls are just trolling her.
They were just making it up.
That's awesome.
And like, there's a documentary that goes into this and goes into how other anthropologists were trying to like blow the whistle on this and be like, hey guys, like, this didn't actually happen. Like, there was a Polynesian person. I think Polynesian. I'm going to assume it's Polynesian. It might be Melanesian or whatever, or Austronesian, but I'm going to assume Polynesian. We'll go with that. And the Polynesian person was in a classroom at one point, like, and they talk about this in the documentary,
right?
Where they're in the classroom and they're learning about their own culture from this professor, and the professor is teaching from Margaret Mead's book,
right, with full authority.
And the Polynesian person, after a little while, raises their hand and says, like, yeah, I'm from that place, and that's all wrong. And like, they had a short conversation. The professor dismisses class early and just talks to that person.
Wow.
And then like the documentary then like interviews some of the specific women who, like, now they're women, but they were teenagers at the time. Literally, one of the subjects that Margaret Mead was interviewing, and this woman is like, yeah, we just lied to her, like, from her own mouth, is telling them. And then it interviews like this really conservative like chief there who's like, no, we don't do this here,
right?
We don't do this. And they're like a Christian tribe, and they even were at the time,
right?
Like, and it's all like, but because of Margaret Mead's name, I think this even happened after she had died, there were anthropologists getting their careers ruined,
right,
and being blacklisted,
right,
because they were arguing against this thing that just wasn't true. And it had come out in the 60s. So this idea that there was this tropical island in where there was just free love going on at the same time as the hippie movement. It was very attractive to Americans, so it became very popular. But it was all bullshit, all lies.
Right.
But that's what universities produce. They don't produce necessarily what's true. They have their methods. They learn things with their methods. A lot of them are correct. A lot of them are just good arguments. And a lot of them are just lies that the institutions themselves are not capable of reckoning with, because they're often tied to individuals who have a lot of power and who have a lot of personal association with those ideas. So it doesn't matter to them whether they're correct or not, because they're directly tied to their success.
Yeah. And the things that you accept as whatever your authority is, you'll hear them pontificate on something, and you're like, oh, this is all true, great. And then when they talk about something that you're an expert in, and you realize this guy doesn't have a clue what he's talking about in my area of expertise, so I'm not going to pay attention to this. And then he moves on to another topic, and you're like, oh, okay. And you continue to listen to him and believe him. And it's like, well, maybe assess that, and that applies to, teaching, news, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And, seriously. But it's so easy for people to have that disconnect where they realize this guy doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. But on other topics that I know nothing, I'll assume that they're the expert.
Absolutely. I had that. And I think are you ready to wrap up here?
There's a few minutes left on the timer, but no, I'm in no rush.
Okay. So I was watching that show. I don't know if you've heard of it. Adam Ruins Everything.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. He just breaks down certain topics. I had watched a full season of his show, and then he came to a show on financial stuff. And that's actually what I do. That's my full-time gig is independent finance. That's what I do. So I don't have a degree in it, but I'm I've read plenty of books, and I understand this stuff pretty well.
Sure.
And I'm watching this episode, and I'm watching it. I'm like, that's incorrect. That's missing context. That's an outright lie. And I'm watching it, and I'm like, oh no. I just watched 10 episodes of this guy talking about topics that I wasn't as familiar with. And I was watching it wow, this is really interesting. It's cool that it's like that. And then I'm watching an episode with him, and it's on something I do know. And just like you said, I'm watching it, I'm like, oh no. But I had the thought of oh crap, what about those other things? What did I not learn about those other things that I didn't know enough about?
Right.
Yeah. It really is like that.
That's yeah. What's one thing? Let's what's one thing that you know now that you wish you knew before you joined the military?
I wish I knew more about the different jobs that were available to me, because and about joining, because trying to join the Marine Corps, you're well, I want to be a Marine. And I was well, I want to do engineering stuff. I wanted to be a combat engineer. That's what I thought I was going to be. But there's a lot of other jobs that I just wanted to join the military. And that's what most people do. So they don't think about their job too much. A lot of people.
Right.
But it's what you're going to do for 4 years. So, and also understanding how that fits in, how that job is in the military. So what I would do if I was going back, and if I was somebody who was joining the military today, before I decided on a job field or a job in general, I would talk to other people. I would talk to people specifically who are in that job, and multiple people, because what you do in the military, your job itself is part of it, and then part of it is just what unit you go to. So there is an element of chance, and also they can just change your job if they want, or you might do something wrong and they might take your job and put you somewhere else. Especially if you're in a more prestigious job, you get in trouble. They might be you're not good enough to be in this job. You're going to do admin. You're going to be a truck driver. You're going to be something like that. Not that those jobs aren't important, but those are literally some of the jobs where they put people who fail out of recon school or something. Right. So, I would spend some time talking to specific Marines, finding them on the internet, go on Reddit and ask and find somebody who's in that job. And I'm sure that it depending on the job, it might be harder to find somebody. Because if you're if you want to know about being a refrigeration mechanic, there's only a few hundred of us. There's not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be hard for you to find one, but like you can probably find some Marine or soldier or sailor who's willing to speak to you specifically if you're trying to join the military about what they do. And I would do that.
Right.
I would do as much research as I could to find out how your life is going to be.
Huh. Yeah. Assess before you commit.
Right. Absolutely. Seriously.
Yeah, that's always
you might
a good
find
plan.
out. Yeah. You might find out that if you're a mechanic in the Marine Corps, you're going to be working 12-hour days, 6 days a week for 4 years.
Right.
And you might be like, hey, maybe I'll do something else. If I were to go back, and obviously I love financial stuff. I like administrative stuff a lot, actually. Like I like administrative stuff. I like doing administrative work, and I like financial stuff. I would have gone back and I would have been a disbursement guy. I would have been a money guy for the Marine Corps if I could go back and
sure.
choose. And it's not really it's not a common job. It's not a big job field, but like I deployed with some of those guys, and what they were doing, I enjoyed a lot of what they were doing, and they had a pretty good work environment. And I was like, I would like to do that. Like that's what I probably would have been better at than what I was doing there. So yeah, really think about what you want to do and how you want your life to be. Because, you go to boot camp, you go to combat school, whatever, you go to those initial schools, and then it's your job. It's your daily job.
Yeah.
And what your job is really depends on what your daily life is.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. I think that's good. That kind of ties into the other question of how would you advise a kid, and I think that's pretty good. I think that's useful. It is easy as a kid. You're just like, oh, I'm going to join the Army. And like you're saying, there's so many jobs, and they just think like the Army, like it's one glob. And it's like, no, it's just like a corporation or any other business, or a business, I should say. There's tons of roles to fill, and especially in the Army, they've got numbers for every one of them. So you can, and then like Seriously. You're saying, your experience was you had a lot of flexibility. You took a little extra school, you did some different stuff, and got different responsibilities. So even in your small couple hundred guy field, your experience was unique to a large extent,
right?
From the other couple hundred.
It's also that there's other things you can go, like if you don't like your job in the Marine Corps, like you join with your job, like after you're in for 2 years, you can sign up and try to go MSG, Marine Security Guard. Like after 2 years, you want to get out of it, you can go guard embassies.
Right.
Go live in 3 different countries over 3 years,
Right.
You can do a bunch of things. And you also might just be sent somewhere that they want you. Like I became the guy in the tool room. I didn't want to do that. Even though my job was being a mechanic, I became that. But then then showing my capabilities with administrative stuff, I leveraged that into I leveraged that into the layettes job, signing out those parts, which I actually enjoyed a lot more. And then from there, I had proven myself as like a adept administrator. And then I moved up to the hazmat and got right into a job that was perfect for me because I was able to show what I could do, even in jobs that I didn't like. My performance spoke for itself. And I was then able to leverage that and be like, hey, like literally the way that I became the hazmat guy is that I heard that there were hazmat openings. Like I heard that there was they were sending people to a hazmat class.
Right.
I just heard that was going on. Someone said that. So I walked up to I talked to my sergeant first. I talked to the guy who's directly in charge of me, and I said, hey, I want to go to this hazmat school. Can I go talk to Sergeant Sanchez, whatever the platoon sergeant's name was? And my sergeant said yes. So I went to Sergeant Sanchez, the platoon sergeant. I said, I want to go to this school. Is there any way I can get on it? And he said, yeah, sure. Go ahead. And the plan with that was like, I talked to my sergeant, who was the engineering sergeant. And I said, we need a hazmat guy. I'll be the hazmat guy for engineering section if you let me go to this school. And since I was also working in layettes at the time, I had to talk to my sergeant in engineering and my sergeant in layettes.
Right.
They both, yeah. I went to the platoon sergeant and I told him, hey, my layettes sergeant said it was okay. My engineering sergeant said it was okay. And they need a hazmat guy for engineering section. can I go to this school? And then, I mean, he immediately says yes, because if it's okay with my engineering sergeant and it's okay with the land sergeant, like that's fine. And we needed one. And then I did that job so well, I started doing stuff for more than just my section. I did it for others in the platoon, and eventually I was just like, hey, I should be the platoon hazmat manager. And they were like, yeah, you should. And then when I was the platoon hazmat manager, I was doing stuff for the battalion because I was talking to the gunnery sergeant.
Right.
And I was like, hey, I should. And he said to me, all right, you're going to be the assistant ECO, the assistant environmental compliance officer, and you're basically going to do the job. And I said, okay. And then we went to the next school together, which was the environmental compliance officer school.
Right.
And then that was my job until I was done. So like it's also what you make of it, and like you don't necessarily have control over what you do. Like at the end of the day, you don't, and they can pull you from whatever you're doing at any time. But you can play the game. You know, you can play the game, and if it works within their system, and you're providing something for them, they'll work with you. They will.
Sure.
They might, I should say, but like, you know, like it's not always going to work, but there's ways to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It to a large extent, there's like a lot of life. It is what you make of it. It's just maybe there's different pressures that would resist your efforts.
What sucks is that like you can't quit. It's illegal to quit. You know? I mean, the easiest way to get kicked out of the military, if you want to, is just to say you're going to kill yourself.
Right.
Some guys do that. Some guys mean it. Some guys don't. But like, if you're just like, I'm going to kill myself, and you don't back off of wanting to kill yourself, they'll be like, all right, you got to get out.
Right.
Like, and then they'll just separate you. But
they're
not going to treat you well in the meantime.
Yeah. Which sometimes might be an attempt to remove liability as opposed to make you not want to kill yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They're kicking you out, not because they like, oh, let's get him out of this terrible situation that makes him want to kill himself. They're like, let's get him out so that if he does, we're not responsible.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that like the medical staff probably cares about you being suicidal.
Sure.
But the guys in your unit, like especially the staff NCO and officers, they don't give a shit. In my experience, they don't give a shit.
Right.
They provide lip service to it, but like it doesn't surprise me that so many Marines and people in the military kill themselves, because there's not a lot of, in my experience, I wasn't like suicidal in the Marine Corps. I wasn't like, I didn't go through that whole thing, but I had a number of Marines that were. I had guys that were in my platoon, and the way they were treated was concerning, really, really concerning to me.
Sure.
It was not good, especially in the context of like the high military suicide rate and everything, and the words people had said. I really, really felt betrayed by my leaders, the way that they handled those things.
Sure.
Especially with one, like there was one Marine he wasn't like in my chain of command. It was a little awkward because when I was a corporal, I was living with another corporal, and he was that corporal's Marine. But if a Marine is like having trouble, they assign them a mentor, and they get to choose their mentor. And because I had been talking to him, and like I'd been like talking to him and helping him out with certain things, the Marine, when asked who he wanted to be his mentor in front of the staff NCOs, like the staff NCOs of our platoon asked him, who do you want to be your mentor, in front of his own corporal. I mean, the standard answer should be his own corporal, but he said Corporal Urban. I want Corporal Urban to be my mentor. And then I have his chain of command corporal, who's my roommate, coming to me and being like, dude, he wants you to be his mentor. Like, why doesn't he want me? I'm his corporal. And like, you know, he had talked to me about my own roommate. Right. So I knew why he didn't want him to be, and I wasn't surprised. But to my roommate, I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Sorry. Like, I don't know. I'm like, yeah.
Wow.
But, you know, I did the best that I could, and I went to that guy's wedding a few years ago.
Oh, sweet.
The suicidal Marine who was then separated. Yeah. So he's
awesome.
Doing well. He's doing great. And, you know, he didn't deploy. He got out of the Marine Corps after a couple of years. It wasn't right for him, but it's all right. It's okay. Doesn't make him any less of a person. It doesn't even make him not a Marine.
Right. Yeah. Huh. Well, yeah. No, I appreciate it. Thanks, man. That was a blast. You have any final thoughts? A last comment or wrap up or a little serial, a little illegitimate scholar plug?
Illegitimate Scholar, definitely go and listen to that if you enjoyed this history, social studies content outside the mainstream. But, if you're considering joining the military or you're a parent whose child is joining the military, like, talk to people, because recruiters, they're car salesmen. They're salesmen. You gotta read the contracts, talk to them, talk to other people that are in the military and get their perspective and figure it out. Choose your job. That's important to do. And also, I highly recommend joining the military to anybody. It's super intense, especially in like the Marine Corps, but it's an intensity that's honestly worth it. And it's good. It's a good thing to do. It's not something everybody has to do, but it's a good thing.
Thank you for listening to this episode of How I Embraced the Suck. If you enjoyed the show, tell a friend. And as my Girl Scout den mother used to say, stay frosty.
Sorry, I'll be right back.